If I were giving a young man advice as to how he might succeed in life, I would say to him, pick out a good father and mother, and begin life in Ohio. Wilbur Wright. All the money anyone needs is just enough to prevent one from being a burden on others. No bird soars in a calm. Wilbur Wright. We learn much by tribulation, and by adversity our hearts are made better. But it isn't true, Orville responded emphatically, to say we had no special advantages. The greatest thing in our favor was growing up in a family where there was always much encouragement to intellectual curiosity. The best dividends on the labor invested have invariably come from seeking more knowledge rather than more power. The exhilaration of flying is too keen, the pleasure too great, for it to be neglected as a sport. The desire to fly is an idea handed down to us by our ancestors who, in their grueling travels across trackless lands in prehistoric times, looked enviously on the birds soaring freely through space, at full speed, above all obstacles, on the infinite highway of the air. No bird soars in a calm. If birds can glide for long periods of time, then, why can't I? The airplane stays up because it doesn't have the time to fall. There is no sport equal to that which aviators enjoy while being carried through the air on great white wings. More than anything else the sensation is one of perfect peace mingled with an excitement that strains every nerve to the utmost if you can conceive of such a combination. For some years I have been afflicted with the belief that flight is possible to man. My disease has increased in severity and I feel that it will soon cost me an increased amount of money if not my life. We figured that Lilienthal in 5 years of time had spent only about 5 hours in actual gliding through the air. The wonder was not that he had done so little, but that he had accomplished so much. It is possible to fly without motors, but not without knowledge and skill. Do not let yourself be forced into doing anything before you are ready. Every mind should be true to itself, should think, investigate and conclude for itself, wrote Ingersoll. If we worked on the assumption that what is accepted as true really is true, then there would be little hope for advance. Man, by reason of his greater intellect, can more reasonably hope to equal birds in knowledge than to equal nature in the perfection of her machinery. The ability to do this so quickly was largely due to the enthusiastic and efficient services of Mr. C. E. Taylor, who did all the machine work in our shop for the first as well as the succeeding experimental machines. We were lucky enough to grow up in an environment where there was always much encouragement to children to pursue intellectual interests, to investigate whatever aroused curiosity. All the money anyone needs is just enough to prevent one from being a burden on others. We wrote to a number of the best-known automobile manufacturers in an endeavor to secure a motor for the new machine. Not receiving favorable answers from any of these, we proceeded to design a motor of our own. It was the first time in the history of the world that a machine carrying a man and driven by a motor had lifted itself from the ground in free flight. When the machine was flown as a kite, the wing with the greater angle always had a greater lift, because the kite cords or cables prevented one wing from attaining a higher speed through the air than the other. The balancing of a flyer may seem, at first thought, to be a very simple matter, yet almost every experimenter had found in this one point which he could not satisfactorily master. Thousands of men had thought about flying machines and a few had even built machines which they called flying machines, but these were guilty of almost everything except flying. What is chiefly needed is skill rather than machinery. For some years I have been afflicted with the belief that flight is possible to man. My disease has increased in severity, and I feel that it will cost me an increased amount of money if not my life. The boys of the Wright family are all lacking in determination and push. None of us has as yet made particular use of the talent in which he excels other men. Orville cooks 1 week, and I cook the next. Orville's week we have bread and butter and meat and gravy and coffee 3 times a day. My week I give him more variety. We don't fuss a bit about whose week it is to cook. We could not understand that there was anything about a bird that could not be built on a larger scale and used by man. If the bird's wings would sustain it in the air without the use of any muscular effort, we did not see why man could not be sustained by the same results. Wilbur, you owe it to the world that you should avoid all unnecessary personal risks. Your death, or even becoming an invalid, would seriously affect the progress of aeronautical science. Orville would be crippled and burdened. We found that men of the very highest standing in the profession of science and invention had attempted to solve the problem of flight, but one by one, they had been compelled to confess themselves beaten and had discontinued their efforts. In studying their failures, we found many points of interest to us. Wilbur and I could hardly wait for morning to come to get at something that interested us. That's happiness. With all the knowledge and skill acquired in thousands of flights in the last 10 years, I would hardly think today of making my first flight on a strange machine in a 27-mile wind, even if I knew that the machine had already been flown and was safe. My brother and I became seriously interested in the problem of human flight in 1899. We knew that men had by common consent adopted human flight as the standard of impossibility. When a man said, "It can't be done," a man might as well try to fly. He was understood as expressing the final limit of impossibility. Our own growing belief that man might nevertheless learn to fly was based on the idea that while thousands of the most dissimilar body structures, such as insects, fish, reptiles, birds and mammals, were flying every day at pleasure, it was reasonable to suppose that man might also fly. After these years of experience I look with amazement upon our audacity in attempting flights with a new and untried machine under such circumstances. The desire to fly is an idea handed down to us by our ancestors who, in their grueling travels across trackless lands in prehistoric times, looked enviously on the birds soaring freely through. The airplane stays up because it doesn't have the time to fall. No flying machine will ever fly from New York to Paris, because no known motor can run at the requisite speed for 4 days without stopping. In our gliding experiments, we had had a number of experiences in which we had landed upon one wing, but the crushing of the wing had absorbed the shock so that we were not uneasy about the motor in case of a landing of that kind. We could hardly wait to get up in the morning,